The heavy glass doors of Riverside Community College squeaked as Lily pushed them open, clutching her worn messenger bag tighter against her chest. The September morning air was crisp, but sweat formed on her palms as she walked down the long hallway toward room 215, Music Theory and Performance, the class she desperately needed to transfer to a four-year university. Her sneakers made soft squeaking sounds on the polished floor. Each step echoed in the empty corridor, making her feel smaller and more out of place. Through the classroom window, she could see other students already seated, chatting and laughing with the easy confidence of people who belong there. Lily took a deep breath and pushed open the classroom door. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward her, then quickly looked away. She kept her head down, scanning for an empty seat. There, in the back corner, away from everyone else, perfect dot as she made her way to the back row. She caught fragments of conversations around her. Designer handbags sat casually on desks next to the latest smartphones. One girl was showing off photos from her summer in Europe. A guy near the front was talking about his private piano teacher who charged $200 per lesson. Lily slipped into her seat and pulled out a simple notebook and pen. Around her, students were arranging expensive music supplies, leather portfolios, professional manuscript paper, and electronic metronomes that probably cost more than her entire semester's textbooks. "Good morning, everyone," came a voice from the front of the room. Dr. Rodriguez was a tall man in his 50s with graying hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a crisp button-down shirt and moved with the confident posture of someone who had spent decades in academia. "I see we have some new faces today," he said, scanning the room. "Let's start with attendance, shall we?" One by one, he called out names. "Ashley Peterson? Here?" A blonde girl in the front row raised her hand, her voice bright and cheerful. "Brandon." "Kim?" "Present," called a young man wearing an expensive college sweatshirt. "Courtney Williams?" "Here." Another confident voice. The names continued, each student responding with enthusiasm. Lily noticed how comfortable they all seemed, how easily they spoke up. These were kids who had grown up in music programs, who had never had to worry about whether they could afford their next meal, let alone piano lessons. "Lily Chun?" Her name seemed to hang in the air. Lily's voice caught in her throat. She cleared it softly and said, "Here." But the word came out as barely a whisper. Dr. Rodriguez looked up from his attendance sheet, scanning the room. "Lily Chun? Here," she said again, a little louder this time, raising her hand slightly. "Ah, there you are in the back. Welcome to Music Theory and Performance." A few students turned to look at her, taking in her thrift store clothes and the way she seemed to shrink into her chair. One girl whispered something to her friend, and they both glanced back at Lily before quickly turning around. Dr. Rodriguez began explaining the course structure. "This class will challenge you in ways you may not expect. We'll study music theory, yes, but more importantly, you'll each prepare and perform a significant piece for our end-of-semester recital." Lily's stomach tightened. A performance? In front of people? She had known this was a performance class, but somehow hearing it stated so directly made it feel real and terrifying. "The recital will be held in the main auditorium," Dr. Rodriguez continued. "Family and friends are welcome to attend. It's quite an event. We usually have about 200 people in the audience. 200 people. Lily felt dizzy. She had spent the last year trying to be invisible, trying not to draw attention to herself. The thought of standing on a stage in front of that many strangers made her palms sweat even more. "Now, I know some of you are wondering about the difficulty level," Dr. Rodriguez said with a smile. "This isn't a beginner class. I expect each of you to choose a piece that will truly challenge your abilities. We're talking about serious classical repertoire here." A hand shot up in the front row. It was Ashley, the blonde girl. "Dr. Rodriguez, will we be able to use the practice rooms?" "Of course. The music department has 6 practice rooms available. For student use? You'll need to sign up for time slots, though. They tend to fill up quickly, especially as we get closer to the recital date." Lily's heart sank. She hadn't even thought about practice rooms or sign-up sheets. How was she supposed to compete for practice time with students who probably had private studios at home? What about accompaniment? Asked another student. Some of the pieces on the approved list require piano accompaniment. Excellent question, Brandon. Yes, we have a graduate student who provides accompaniment for those who need it. There is a small fee involved, $50 for the semester. $50. Lily did quick math in her head. After tuition, books, and basic living expenses, she had maybe $30 left for the entire month. $50 might as well have been $500. The class continued with Dr. Rodriguez, explaining grading criteria and expectations. Lily tried to focus, but her mind kept wandering to all the obstacles she hadn't anticipated. Practice room, fees, accompaniment costs, sheet music expenses. It all added up to a sum she simply didn't have. Now, let's go around the room and have everyone share a bit about their musical background, Dr. Rodriguez announced. This will help me understand where each of you is starting from. Lily's anxiety spiked. She watched as, one by one, her classmates shared impressive stories. Ashley had been in youth orchestras since middle school. Brandon had attended summer music camps at prestigious conservatories. Courtney had performed in regional competitions and won several awards. Each story was more intimidating than the last. These students had spent thousands of dollars and countless hours building their musical foundations. They spoke casually about opportunities that Lily could never have dreamed of affording. As Dr. Rodriguez worked his way around the room, Lily's turn grew closer. What could she possibly say that wouldn't sound pathetic in comparison? That she had learned to play on an old keyboard with half the keys broken? That her most recent performance had been playing softly in her tiny apartment, trying not to disturb the neighbors? And Lily, what about you? Dr. Rodriguez's voice seemed to come from far away. All eyes were on her again. She felt her cheeks burning. I've played a little, she managed to say. That's wonderful. What type of pieces have you worked on? Lily's mind went blank. She couldn't tell the truth. It would sound unbelievable. But she couldn't lie either. Just basic stuff, she said finally. Dr. Rodriguez nodded politely and moved on to the next student. But Lily caught the look in his eyes. It was the same expression she had seen so many times before, polite sympathy mixed with lowered expectations. He had already categorized her as one of the struggling students, who would probably barely pass the class. As the other students continued sharing their experiences, Lily stared down at her notebook. The blank page seemed to mock her, just like everything else in this room. She had thought that getting into college would be the hard part. Now she realized that belonging here, truly belonging, was going to be much more difficult than she had ever imagined. The class period felt endless, but eventually Dr. Rodriguez dismissed them with a reminder about the upcoming assignment. As students filed out, chatting excitedly about their plans, Lily remained in her seat for a moment longer. She watched through the window as her classmates walked across campus in small groups, their expensive bags bouncing as they laughed and talked. They moved with such confidence, such certainty that they belonged in this world of music and academia. Lily finally gathered her things and headed for the door. She had made it through her first day, but she already knew this semester was going to test her in ways she wasn't sure she was ready for. 2 weeks into the semester, Lily had settled into a routine of arriving early to class and leaving quickly afterward. She kept to herself, taking notes diligently while her classmates formed study groups and friendships around her. Today felt different, though. Dr. Rodriguez had mentioned something important was coming, and the energy in the room was electric with anticipation. "All right, everyone, settle down," Dr. Rodriguez called out as he entered the classroom carrying a thick stack of papers. "Today we're going to discuss your major assignment for the semester." The chattering died down immediately. Even Ashley, who usually whispered throughout the entire class, fell silent. Lily could feel the tension in the room as every student leaned forward in their seats. Dr. Rodriguez moved to the front of the classroom and set the papers down on his desk with a solid thump. As I mentioned on the first day, you'll each be performing a solo piece at our end-of-semester recital. Today I'm going to give you the approved repertoire list and explain exactly what I expect from each of you. He began walking around the room, placing a 3-page document on each desk. When he reached Lily's corner, he set the paper down without making eye contact, already moving on to the next student. Lily looked down at the title, Approved Solo Repertoire Advanced Level. Her heart started racing as she scanned the list. Bach Inventions and Sinfonias, Chopin Etudes, Beethoven Sonatas, Mozart Concerto Movements, Rachmaninoff Preludes. These weren't just difficult pieces, these were the kind of compositions that serious pianists spent months or even years perfecting. Now, I want to be very clear about something, Dr. Rodriguez continued, returning to the front of the room. This performance will account for 40% of your final grade. That means if you don't perform, or if your performance is significantly below standard, you will likely fail this course. Lily felt the blood drain from her face. 40%. She couldn't afford to fail this class. She needed these credits to transfer to the state university next fall. Without this transfer, her dream of getting a bachelor's degree would be crushed before it even began. You might be wondering why the percentage is so high, Dr. Rodriguez said, answering the question. That was clearly on everyone's mind. Music is a performance art. You can understand theory perfectly. But if you can't apply it in a live performance setting, then you haven't truly mastered the material. Brandon raised his hand. Dr. Rodriguez, how long should our pieces be? Excellent. Question. I'm looking for pieces that are at least 4 to 5 minutes long. This isn't about playing something short and simple perfectly. I want to see you stretch yourselves, take on something that will really challenge your technical and musical abilities. 4 to 5 minutes. Lily looked back at the list, trying to estimate the length of various pieces. Most of the compositions listed were substantial works that would easily meet that requirement. The problem was, she had no idea how she was going to learn any of them. Another important point, Dr. Rodriguez continued, you'll need to purchase your own sheet music. I can recommend some good music stores in town, or you can order online. Expect to spend about $20 to $30 per piece, depending on the edition you choose. $20 to $30. Lily did quick math in her head. After paying for textbooks, she had barely enough money left for food for the rest of the month. The idea of spending $30 on sheet music felt impossible. Ashley raised her hand. What about practice time? Are there restrictions on how much we can use the practice rooms? Great question. You can sign up for 2-hour blocks and you're allowed to reserve up to 6 hours per week. However, as we get closer to the recital date, I may open up additional hours if needed, 6 hours per week. Lily had never thought about practice time being limited. At home, she could play for hours without worrying about time restrictions or other students waiting for their turn. Now, let's talk about the level of difficulty I'm expecting, Dr. Rodriguez said, leaning against his desk. I know some of you might be tempted to choose something you're already comfortable with. Let me be clear, that's not what this assignment is about. I want to see growth. I want to see you tackle something that pushes you beyond your current abilities. Courtney raised her hand. How do we know if a piece is too difficult for us? Dr. Rodriguez smiled. That's the beautiful thing about music. There's almost no such thing as too difficult. If you're willing to put in the work, obviously we need to be realistic about what's achievable in one semester. But I'd rather see you attempt something ambitious and not quite nail every passage than play something safe and boring perfectly. Lily felt a knot forming in her stomach. How was she supposed to choose something ambitious when she couldn't even afford the sheet music? And how could she practice effectively with only 6 hours per week in the practice rooms? I'll be scheduling individual meetings with each of you over the next 2 weeks, Dr. Rodriguez announced. We'll discuss your piece selection and make sure you're choosing something appropriate for your skill level. I want everyone to feel challenged but not overwhelmed. The word overwhelmed stuck in Lily's mind. She was already feeling overwhelmed, and they hadn't even chosen pieces yet. One more thing, Dr. Rodriguez added. The recital will be held on December 15th in the main auditorium. That gives you exactly 10 weeks to prepare. In my experience, that's enough time to learn a substantial piece if you practice consistently. And efficiently 10 weeks. Lily tried to imagine herself standing on that stage in 10 weeks, performing one of these incredible pieces in front of 200 people. The thought made her dizzy. As class ended, students immediately began clustering around Dr. Rodriguez's desk, asking questions about specific pieces and sharing their initial thoughts about what they might choose. Lily gathered her things slowly, listening to the excited chatter around her. "I'm thinking about the Chopin Ballade in G minor," she heard Ashley saying. "My private teacher thinks I'm ready for it." "I've been working on Bach's Chromatic Fantasy for months," Brandon added. "This would be perfect timing to perform it." Private teachers, months of preparation. These students were already ahead of the game. While Lily was struggling just to understand what the game was, she walked out of the classroom feeling more isolated than ever. In the hallway, she found a quiet corner and pulled out the repertoire list again. Her eyes moved down the page, taking in composer names and piece titles that she knew were masterpieces of classical music. The Bach inventions looked somewhat manageable. She had played a few of them before, though not recently. But Dr. Rodriguez had been clear that he wanted to see growth and challenge, not comfort zone pieces. The Chopin etudes caught her attention next. She knew they were technically demanding, designed to develop specific aspects of piano technique. But they were also beautiful, passionate pieces that could showcase real musical artistry. The Beethoven sonatas were tempting too. She had always loved Beethoven's music, the drama, the emotional intensity, the way he could make the piano sound like an entire orchestra. But as she looked at the list, reality set in. It didn't matter which piece she preferred or which would challenge her the most. She had to choose something based on what she could afford and what she could realistically prepare with limited practice time. Maybe she could find used sheet music online. Maybe she could photocopy something from the library, though she wasn't sure if that was legal. Maybe she could convince Dr. Rodriguez to let her choose something not on the list, something simpler and cheaper. She walked across campus. Toward her next class, Lily felt the weight of the assignment settling on her shoulders. This wasn't just about learning a piece of music. This was about proving she belonged in this world, proving she could compete with students who had every advantage she lacked. The autumn air was getting colder, and she pulled her thin jacket tighter around herself. 10 weeks suddenly felt like both an eternity and no time at all. She had 10 weeks to find a way to make this work. 10 weeks to figure out how to turn herself into the kind of student who could stand confidently on that stage and deliver a performance worthy of 40% of her grade. 10 weeks to prove that she deserved to be here, even if everything about her circumstances suggested otherwise. The following week, Dr. Rodriguez began class with an announcement that made Lily's stomach clench with anxiety. "Today, I want each of you to share your musical background in more detail," he said, settling into his chair with a notepad. "This will help me understand where each of you is coming from and guide you toward appropriate piece selections for the recital." Lily watched as her classmates straightened up in their seats, clearly eager to share their accomplishments. She sank lower in her chair, hoping somehow to become invisible. "Let's start with Ashley," Dr. Rodriguez said, turning to the blonde girl in the front row. Ashley beamed. "Well, I started piano when I was 4 with Mrs. Henderson. She's one of the most respected teachers in the city. I've been studying with her for 14 years now. I've participated in the state piano competition every year since I was 8, and I placed 3rd in my age division last spring." Dr. Rodriguez nodded approvingly, making notes. "Excellent. And what level of repertoire have you been working on recently?" "This summer I performed Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor at a recital. Before that I worked on Liszt's Liebestraum No. 3 and some Bach from the Well-Tempered Clavier." Lily's heart sank. Those were advanced pieces, the kind that took years of serious study to master. And Ashley talked about them so casually, as if playing Chopin and Liszt was just a normal part of life. "Wonderful preparation for this class," Dr. Rodriguez said. Brandon, what about you? Brandon cleared his throat confidently. I've been studying piano for 12 years and I also play violin. Last summer, I attended the National Music Camp in Michigan. It's a 6-week intensive program. We had master classes with professors from Juilliard and Curtis. Lily had heard of Juilliard. It was one of the most prestigious music schools in the world. The fact that Brandon had studied with professors from there made her feel even smaller. I've been working on more contemporary pieces lately, Brandon continued. Some Prokofiev, Bartók, that kind of thing. My teacher thinks I'm ready to tackle some serious 20th century repertoire. Excellent, Dr. Rodriguez said, making more notes. That kind of diverse experience will serve you well. Courtney? Courtney tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and smiled. I actually started with violin when I was 5, but switched to piano at 7. My mom thought it would be good for me to have a solid foundation in both. I've done summer programs at 3 different music conservatories and I compete in the regional young artist competition every year. The stories continued around the room. Private lessons from renowned teachers, summer programs that cost thousands of dollars, competition wins and prestigious performance opportunities. Each student's background was more impressive than the last. Lily listened to tales of music theory camps where students spent entire summers diving deep into analysis and composition. She heard about master classes with famous pianists, recitals in beautiful concert halls, and opportunities to perform with youth orchestras. One student mentioned studying abroad in Vienna, taking lessons at the same conservatory where Mozart had once taught. Another talked about a scholarship to a prestigious summer festival, where they had worked with Grammy-winning musicians. As Dr. Rodriguez moved closer to her section of the room, Lily felt her palms getting sweaty. What could she possibly say? That wouldn't sound ridiculous after these incredible stories. Finally, Dr. Rodriguez looked directly at her. Lily, tell us about your musical journey. The room fell silent. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward her. Lily felt her throat tighten, and for a moment she couldn't speak at all. She started, then stopped. She couldn't tell them about learning to play on her grandmother's old upright piano in a tiny apartment. She couldn't mention how her grandmother had fled Europe with nothing but her memories of musical training. She couldn't explain how they had practiced in secret, late at night, so the neighbors wouldn't complain. I've played a little, she finally managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Rodriguez leaned forward slightly. How long have you been playing? A while, Lily said, being intentionally vague. The truth was too complicated, too personal to share with this room full of strangers who had grown up with every advantage. What kind of pieces have you worked on? Dr. Rodriguez pressed gently. Lily's mind raced. She had learned everything from Bach inventions to Chopin etudes, from Mozart sonatas to Debussy impressions. But how could she explain that without mentioning her grandmother? How could she describe 15 years of intense, passionate study that had taken place in secret, away from the formal world of lessons and competitions? Just basic things, she said, looking down at her hands. She heard a barely audible sniff from somewhere in the room. When she glanced up, she saw Ashley whispering something to the girl next to her. Both girls looked back at Lily with expressions that mixed pity with dismissal. Dr. Rodriguez made a note on his pad, and Lily caught a glimpse of what he wrote. Limited background, will need extra support. The assumption was clear. Based on her hesitant answers and modest appearance, he had categorized her as a beginner who would struggle to keep up with the rest of the class. That's perfectly fine, Lily, Dr. Rodriguez said in a tone that was meant to be encouraging but came across as patronizing. Everyone starts somewhere. The important thing is that you're here and willing to learn. Lily nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She watched as Dr. Rodriguez moved on to the next student, who immediately launched into a story about performing at Carnegie Hall as part of a youth ensemble. For the rest of the class period, Lily felt the weight of Dr. Rodriguez's assumption pressing down on her. She noticed how he spoke differently to her when he walked around the room. using simpler language and offering basic explanations that he didn't give to other students. When he handed back their first theory assignments, he paused at her desk. "Very good work, Lily," he said quietly. "I can see you're really trying hard to understand the concepts." His tone suggested surprise, as if he hadn't expected her to grasp basic music theory. The irony was almost painful. Music theory had been as natural to her as breathing for over a decade. After class, as students filed out discussing their weekend practice plans, Lily overheard Ashley talking to her friend near the door. "I feel kind of bad for that girl in the back," Ashley said, not bothering to lower her voice. "She seems so lost. I bet she's never even heard of half the composers on that repertoire list." "Dr. Rodriguez will probably have to give her something really simple," her friend replied. "Maybe a Mozart sonatina or something from one of those beginner books." Lily pretended to organize her backpack while listening to their conversation. They were talking about her as if she weren't even there, as if her financial situation and quiet demeanor automatically meant she lacked musical ability. As she finally left the classroom, Lily felt more isolated than ever. She had spent years developing her musical skills in private, pouring her heart and soul into every piece she learned. But in this world of formal training and expensive opportunities, none of that seemed to matter. The assumption had been made. In Dr. Rodriguez's mind and in the minds of her classmates, she was the struggling student who would need extra help just to get through the semester. They had looked at her thrift store clothes, her quiet voice, and her reluctance to boast about her background, and they had decided who she was walking across campus. Lily realized that this assumption would follow her throughout the semester. Every assignment, every interaction, every evaluation would be filtered through Dr. Rodriguez's belief that she was operating at a basic level. Part of her wanted to correct the misconception, to prove them all wrong immediately. But another part of her knew that revealing the truth would bring questions she wasn't ready to answer. Questions about her grandmother, her family situation, and why she was here at community college instead of at a prestigious conservatory. So she would let them think what they wanted to think. She would let Dr. Rodriguez make his assumptions and her classmates whisper their judgments. But deep down, she knew that when the time came to perform, she would have the chance to show them exactly who she really was. The question was whether she would have the courage to do it. 3 weeks had passed since Dr. Rodriguez had asked students to share their musical backgrounds, and Lily had managed to avoid making a decision about her recital piece. Every time he approached her about it, she found excuses. She was still researching options, still considering different composers, still trying to decide what would be best. The truth was, she was paralyzed by the contradiction between what she could afford and what she was capable of playing. She had spent hours in the library, looking through music scores and trying to find something that would challenge her appropriately while remaining within her non-existent budget. On this particular Tuesday morning, Dr. Rodriguez's patience had clearly run out. "Lily, please stay after class," he said as students began packing up their things. "We need to discuss your piece selection." Her stomach dropped. She had been dreading this conversation, knowing it was inevitable, but hoping to delay it as long as possible. As the classroom emptied, Dr. Rodriguez gathered his papers and moved to the desk directly in front of where Lily was sitting. His expression was a mixture of concern and mild frustration. "Lily, we're getting close to the point where you need to start serious preparation," he began. "The other students have been practicing their pieces for 2 weeks already. What's going on?" Lily looked down at her hands. "I'm sorry, Dr. Rodriguez. I've been looking at the list, but I'm having trouble deciding." "What kind of trouble? Are you overwhelmed by the choices?" She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. In a way, that was true. She was overwhelmed, just not in the way he thought. Dr. Rodriguez studied her for a moment, then pulled out the repertoire list. "You know what? Let me make this easier for you. Sometimes when students are uncertain, it helps to have the teacher choose something appropriate." Lily's heart started racing. She had a terrible feeling about where this was heading. "Let's see, Dr. Rodriguez murmured, scanning the list. Given your background, I think we need something that will really stretch your abilities but won't be completely overwhelming. He was talking about her as if she were a child who needed training wheels. The condescending tone made her chest tighten with frustration. "Here we go," he said, pointing to a spot on the second page. Chopin's Revolutionary Etude in C minor. It's technically challenging enough to meet the requirements of this class, but it's also one of the more approachable etudes in terms of musical interpretation. Lily's eyes widened. The Revolutionary Etude was one of Chopin's most demanding pieces, a whirlwind of technical difficulty that required years of advanced training to master properly. For Dr. Rodriguez to suggest it as appropriate for someone he considered a beginner was almost insulting. "Dr. Rodriguez," she started, but he held up a hand. "I know it might seem intimidating at first glance," he said with a patronizing smile. "But I've found that students often surprise themselves when they're pushed beyond their comfort zones. You don't have to master every single run and passage. Just do your best with the easier sections, and don't worry too much about the really difficult parts, the easier sections." Lily almost laughed out loud. Dr. Rodriguez was assigning her one of the most technically demanding pieces in the piano repertoire while simultaneously telling her not to worry about playing it well. "The important thing," he continued, "is that you challenge yourself. This piece will really stretch your abilities, and I think the experience will be valuable for you, even if the performance isn't perfect." Around them, the classroom was completely empty now. Through the windows, Lily could see other students walking across campus, chatting and laughing without a care in the world. None of them had to sit through conversations like this where their abilities were judged and found lacking before they even had a chance to prove themselves. "Now, about the sheet music," Dr. Rodriguez said, pulling out his phone. "There's a good music store downtown that carries the Henel edition. It's about $25, which is very reasonable for a piece of this caliber. $25. Lily's throat felt tight. She had exactly $18 in her checking account, and that needed to last until her next financial aid. Disbursement in 2 weeks. "If cost is an issue," Dr. Rodriguez continued, clearly noticing her hesitation, "you might be able to find a used copy online. Or perhaps the library has a score you could photocopy, though the quality might not be as good." The suggestion to photocopy library materials was made so casually, as if he assumed someone like her would naturally take shortcuts. Lily wondered if he made the same suggestion to Ashley or Brandon when they needed sheet music. "I'll figure something out," Lily said quietly. "Excellent," Dr. Rodriguez made a note in his gradebook. "Now, let's talk about practice time. Given the technical demands of this piece, you'll want to book as many practice room hours as possible. I'd recommend starting with slow, careful work on the more difficult passages. If only he knew that she had played this exact piece 2 years ago, during one of her last sessions with her grandmother. She remembered the evening clearly, her grandmother sitting beside the old upright piano, guiding her through the emotional interpretation while her fingers navigated the complex runs and octaves. "The key with Chopin," Dr. Rodriguez continued, "is to remember that technique serves the music, not the other way around. Even if you can't play every note perfectly, try to capture the revolutionary spirit of the piece. It's about passion and rebellion, not just flashy fingerwork." Lily nodded politely, though she wanted to scream. Dr. Rodriguez was explaining Chopin to her as if she had never heard the name before, as if she hadn't spent countless hours studying the composer's biographical context and musical innovations. "Any questions?" he asked, closing his gradebook with a satisfied expression. "No, sir," Lily managed to say. "Great. I'm excited to hear how this goes for you, Lily. I think this piece will be a real growth experience." As Dr. Rodriguez gathered his things and left the classroom, Lily remained in her seat for several minutes. The Revolutionary Etude, of all the pieces on that list, he had chosen one of the most technically demanding while simultaneously expressing doubt about her ability to play it well. The irony was almost too much to bear. She had learned this piece under her grandmother's careful guidance, spending months perfecting not just the technical aspects but understanding the historical context that had inspired Chopin to write it. She knew the story of how Chopin had composed it upon hearing about the failed Polish uprising, channeling his grief and anger into music that demanded everything from the performer. But Dr. Rodriguez didn't know any of that. In his mind, he was assigning a struggling student a piece that would stretch her abilities, not realizing that she could probably play it better than he could. As she finally left the empty classroom, Lily felt a mixture of emotions washing over her. There was anger at being so thoroughly underestimated, frustration at the financial barriers that prevented her from simply buying the music she needed, and sadness at the growing distance between who she really was and who everyone assumed her to be. But underneath all of that, there was something else, a spark of defiance that had been building for weeks. Dr. Rodriguez had assigned her this piece expecting mediocrity, expecting her to struggle through the easier sections while giving up on the rest. Maybe it was time to show him exactly what she was capable of. The question was whether she had the courage to step out of the shadows she had carefully built around herself, and whether she was ready for the consequences of revealing who she really was. What none of her classmates knew, what Dr. Rodriguez could never have guessed from Lily's quiet demeanor and secondhand clothes, was that music had been the center of her world for as long as she could remember. At 3 years old, Lily had climbed onto the bench of her grandmother's old upright piano and pressed the keys with tiny fingers, fascinated by the sounds that emerged. Her grandmother, Elena, had been a concert pianist in her native country before the war forced her to flee with nothing but memories and the music she carried in her heart. "Music is the only thing they cannot take from you," Elena had told Lily countless times throughout her childhood. "Everything else can be lost, your home, your possessions, even your family. But once music lives inside you, it becomes part of your soul." Elena had begun teaching Lily formally when she turned 4, starting with simple folk songs and gradually introducing classical pieces. Their tiny apartment had barely enough room for the piano, but every evening after Elena finished her job cleaning office buildings, she would sit beside Lily and guide her through increasingly complex repertoire. There had been no money for expensive method books or fancy editions. Elena taught from memory, playing pieces by ear and showing Lily how to find the patterns within the music. "Listen first," she would say. "Feel the music in your heart, then let your fingers follow." By age 8, Lily was playing Bach inventions. By 10, she had mastered several Mozart sonatas. By 12, she was tackling Chopin nocturnes and Debussy impressions. Elena pushed her granddaughter not with harsh criticism but with infectious passion, sharing stories about each composer and helping Lily understand the emotions behind every piece. "Chopin wrote this when he was homesick for Poland," Elena would explain as they worked through a mazurka. "Can you hear the longing in these phrases? Can you feel how he misses his homeland?" Their practice sessions often lasted 3 or 4 hours, but they never felt like work to Lily. Elena made each piece come alive with stories and context, turning their cramped living room into a world of musical discovery. Elena had been classically trained at one of Europe's finest conservatories. Before her life was turned upside down, she knew proper technique, music theory, and performance traditions that many students never learned even in expensive private lessons. All of this knowledge she poured into Lily with the dedication of someone who understood that music was more than entertainment. It was survival, resistance, and hope all rolled into one. When Lily turned 15, Elena began introducing her to some of the most challenging pieces in the classical repertoire. The Revolutionary Etude was one of them. "This piece," Elena had said, her weathered hands demonstrating the opening octaves, "was born from heartbreak. Chopin heard that Warsaw had fallen to the Russians, and he channeled all his anger and sorrow into these notes." They had spent months working on the Etude, Elena teaching Lily not just how to play the notes, but how to understand the revolutionary spirit that had inspired them. Elena shared stories of her own youth, when music had been a form of quiet rebellion against oppression. "When they take away your freedom," Elena had whispered during one late-night practice session, "sometimes the only way to resist through beauty." Chopin knew this. Every time you play this piece, you are continuing his revolution. Lily had mastered the revolutionary etude by her 16th birthday, along with dozens of other advanced pieces. Elena's health was already declining then, her arthritis making it difficult for her to demonstrate techniques. But her mind remained sharp, and her passion for music burned as bright as ever. The last piece they worked on together was Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, the same piece Ashley had mentioned performing so casually. Elena had been too weak to play it herself, but she guided Lily through every phrase, every emotional nuance, every technical challenge. "Promise me," Elena had said during their final lesson, her voice barely above a whisper. "Promise me you will never let the music die inside you, no matter what happens." Elena passed away on a cold February morning just 6 months ago. With her death, Lily's family lost not only a beloved grandmother, but also their only source of stable income. Elena's small apartment was sold to pay medical bills, and the piano, that beautiful old upright that had been Lily's companion for 15 years, was sold along with everything else. Within 2 months, Lily's family had lost their home. Her parents, who had never understood Elena's devotion to music, decided to move across the country where her father had a job opportunity. There was no room in their new plans for Lily's musical education, no money for private lessons, and no understanding of what music meant to her. "You're 18 now," her mother had said when Lily expressed concern about finding a piano to practice on. "It's time to focus on practical things. Music is a nice hobby, but it won't pay the bills." So Lily had enrolled at Riverside Community College, planning to get her general education requirements out of the way before transferring to a 4-year university. She hadn't intended to take any music classes. The pain of losing Elena and the piano was still too fresh. But when she saw music theory and performance listed as an option for her fine arts requirement, something deep inside her had stirred. Elena's voice echoing in her memory. "Never let the music die inside you." Now, weeks into the semester, Lily had found a way to keep that promise. Late at night, after the campus was officially closed, she would use her student ID to slip into the music building. The security system allowed student access until midnight, but most students were long gone by 10 o'clock. The practice rooms were small and soundproofed, each containing an upright piano that was far better than the old instrument she had learned on. In these quiet, solitary hours, Lily could finally let down her guard and return to the world Elena had shared with her. She would start by stretching her fingers, working through scales and arpeggios that Elena had taught her years ago. Then she would move on to pieces from memory, batch inventions that flowed like conversations, Mozart sonatas that sparkled with wit and elegance, Chopin nocturnes that sang of homesickness and beauty. The revolutionary etude was one of her favorites to play during these secret sessions. Her fingers remembered every passage, every dynamic change, every emotional peak that Elena had helped her discover. Playing it now, in these empty practice rooms, felt like carrying on a conversation with her grandmother's spirit. Sometimes she would experiment with pieces she had never learned formally, working them out by ear and memory. Other times she would revisit old favorites, polishing details and exploring new interpretations. These midnight practice sessions were more than just skill maintenance. They were therapy, rebellion, and worship all at once. In a world where she felt invisible and misunderstood, where financial constraints limited every choice, music remained the one space where she could be completely herself, but she was careful to keep this part of her life completely separate from her daytime identity as the struggling student in Dr. Rodriguez's class. No one could know about her real abilities because that would lead to questions she wasn't ready to answer. Questions about Elena, about her family circumstances, about why someone with her talent was attending community college instead of pursuing serious musical study. So she continued her double life, quiet and unassuming during the day, passionate and skilled in the darkness of night. It was exhausting to maintain the pretense, but it felt safer than the alternative. As she practiced the revolutionary etude in those empty rooms, Elena's words echoed in her memory. "Every time you play this piece, you are continuing his revolution." Lily was beginning to understand that her own quiet revolution was just beginning. 2 weeks before the recital, Dr. Rodriguez was having one of those evenings that every teacher dreaded. He sat in his office, surrounded by stacks of papers that needed grading, lesson plans that needed updating, and recommendation letters that needed writing. The November sun had set hours ago, and the music building was eerily quiet. He had been putting off grading the latest batch of music theory assignments, but they couldn't wait any longer. With a sigh, he gathered the papers and settled in for what he expected to be a long night of work. As he made his way through the stack, he paused at Lily's assignment. Her work was consistently excellent, not just correct, but insightful in ways that suggested a deep understanding of musical structure and harmony. It was puzzling. Considering her apparent lack of formal training, maybe she was just naturally gifted at theoretical concepts, even if her practical skills were limited. He had seen that before students who could analyze music brilliantly on paper but struggled to apply those concepts in performance. By 9:30, Dr. Rodriguez had made significant progress through the grading pile. The building was completely silent now, the kind of deep quiet that only existed in institutional buildings after hours. He was just reaching for the next batch of papers when he heard something that made him freeze. Music. Piano music, specifically. And it was coming from somewhere within the building. Dr. Rodriguez set down his pen and listened more carefully. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, technically complex, and played with a level of artistry that made his breath catch. Someone was playing Chopin's Revolutionary Etude, and they were playing it magnificently. For a moment, he wondered if he was imagining things. The building was supposed to be empty except for him, but the music continued, growing more intense and passionate with each phrase. Dr. Rodriguez stood up from his desk and walked to his office door. The sound was definitely coming from the practice room corridor. One of his advanced students must have gotten special permission to practice. Late, though he couldn't remember approving any such requests, he made his way down the darkened hallway, following the sound of the piano. As he got closer, he could hear the music with perfect clarity. The Revolutionary Etude was being performed with stunning technical precision and emotional depth. Whoever was playing understood not just the notes but the revolutionary spirit that had inspired Chopin to write the piece. The music stopped abruptly, then started again from the beginning. This time, Dr. Rodriguez could hear subtle differences in interpretation, small changes in tempo, and dynamics that suggested the pianist was working on perfecting their performance. He approached the practice room quietly, not wanting to disturb what was clearly an intense practice session. Through the small window in the door, he could see a figure seated at the piano, completely absorbed in the music. It took him a moment to process what he was seeing. The pianist had long dark hair and was wearing the same thrift store clothes he had seen countless times in his classroom. It was Lily Chun, the student he had assumed was struggling with basic musical concepts. Dr. Rodriguez stood frozen in the doorway, unable to believe what he was witnessing. Lily's fingers moved across the keys with the confidence and skill of a conservatory-trained pianist. Every passage that he had told her not to worry about mastering, she was playing flawlessly. Every technical challenge that he had suggested might be beyond her abilities, she was navigating with ease. But it wasn't just the technical proficiency that stunned him. It was the musical maturity, the way she shaped each phrase with deliberate emotional intention. She played like someone who had been studying seriously for years, who understood the historical context and artistic significance of what she was performing. The etude built to its climactic passage, and Lily's playing became even more intense. Her whole body was engaged with the music, swaying slightly with the emotional peaks and valleys of Chopin's composition. This wasn't the hesitant, uncertain student from his classroom. This was an artist in complete command of her craft. As the piece reached its thunderous conclusion, Dr. Rodriguez found himself holding his breath. The final octaves rang out in the small practice room, and then there was silence. Lily sat still. For a moment, her hands resting on the keys. Then she began again, this time working on a specific passage that she wanted to refine. Dr. Rodriguez watched as she practiced the same few measures repeatedly, each time making tiny adjustments too. Her interpretation. Everything about her approach suggested serious training and years of disciplined practice. She worked with the methodical precision of someone who understood exactly what she was trying to achieve. This wasn't a student stumbling through a piece that was too difficult for her. This was a skilled pianist polishing a performance. Dr. Rodriguez realized he had been standing in the doorway for nearly 10 minutes, completely mesmerized. He had been teaching piano for over 20 years, and he could recognize exceptional talent when he heard it. What he was witnessing was far beyond anything he had expected from any of his students, let alone the quiet girl who sat in the back of his classroom. Questions flooded his mind. Where had she learned to play like this? Who had been her teacher? Why was she hiding her abilities? And most importantly, why was she at a community college instead of pursuing serious musical study at a conservatory? As he watched Lily continue her practice, Dr. Rodriguez began to feel a growing sense of shame. He had made assumptions about her based on her appearance, her quiet demeanor, and her reluctance to discuss her background. He had assigned her the revolutionary etude as a challenge that he expected her to struggle with, never imagining that she might already know the piece intimately. Every interaction he had had with her replayed in his mind with new context. Her excellent theory assignments weren't the result of natural aptitude. They reflected deep musical knowledge and training. Her hesitation to choose a recital piece wasn't uncertainty about her abilities. It was something else entirely, something he was only beginning to understand. Lily finished working on the passage she had been refining and moved on to another section of the piece. Dr. Rodriguez could see her making mental notes, adjusting her interpretation based on years of musical intuition and experience. He knew he should announce his presence, but something held him back. This felt like witnessing something sacred and private, a young artist communing with her craft. In the solitude she thought she had, interrupting seemed almost like a violation. Finally, Lily glanced at her watch and began gathering her things. Dr. Rodriguez realized she was preparing to leave, and he quickly stepped away from the door. He didn't want her to know he had been watching, at least not yet. He needed time to process what he had discovered and figure out how to approach her about it. As Lily emerged from the practice room and headed toward the building exit, Dr. Rodriguez remained hidden in the shadows of the hallway. He watched her walk away with a completely different understanding of who she was. The quiet, struggling student he thought he knew was actually one of the most gifted pianists he had ever encountered. And somehow, for reasons he didn't yet understand, she had been hiding this extraordinary talent from everyone around her. As the building fell silent again, Dr. Rodriguez stood alone in the darkened hallway, realizing that he had been witnessing something far more complex than a simple case of a student exceeding expectations. He had discovered a mystery, and he was determined to understand it. The question was how to approach Lily about what he had seen without betraying the fact that he had been watching her private practice session. And more importantly, how to help her understand that her secret was safe with him, and that maybe it was time to stop hiding who she really was. The next morning, Dr. Rodriguez arrived at the music building earlier than usual. He had barely slept, his mind racing with questions about what he had witnessed the night before. As he prepared for his classes, he found himself watching the clock, counting the hours until he would see Lily again. When music theory class began, Dr. Rodriguez couldn't help but study Lily with new eyes. She sat in her usual spot in the back corner, taking notes diligently and avoiding eye contact with her classmates. Everything about her demeanor suggested the same quiet, uncertain student he had known for months. But now he knew better. As class progressed, Dr. Rodriguez found himself noticing details he had missed before. The way Lily's fingers unconsciously moved when he played musical examples, as if she were silently practicing along. The depth of understanding in her written responses to theoretical questions. The fact that she never seemed confused by even the most complex concepts he introduced. After class, as students filed out chatting about their weekend plans, Dr. Rodriguez made his decision. "Lily, could you stay behind for a moment?" he called out. "I'd like to discuss your recital preparation." Lily's stomach dropped. She had been dreading this conversation, knowing that she would eventually have to explain why she hadn't been signing up for official practice, room time, or why she seemed unprepared despite the approaching recital date. As the classroom emptied, Dr. Rodriguez moved to close the door, then returned to sit at the desk directly across from Lily. His expression was different than usual, less condescending, more genuinely curious. "Lily," he began carefully, "I want to ask you something, and I hope you'll be honest with me. How long have you really been playing piano?" The question caught her off guard. She had been expecting him to ask about her practice schedule or her progress on the revolutionary etude. I told you before a while." Dr. Rodriguez leaned forward slightly. "I think there's more to your story than you've shared. Your work in this class suggests a much deeper musical background than you've let on." Lily felt her heart start to race. Had she given herself away somehow? Had she been too eager in answering theoretical questions or shown too much understanding of complex musical concepts? "I don't know what you mean," she said quietly, looking down at her hands. Dr. Rodriguez was silent for a long moment, studying her carefully. When he spoke again, his voice was gentle but direct. "Last night I was working late in my office when I heard someone playing piano in the practice rooms. I went to investigate, and I discovered something quite remarkable." Lily's blood ran cold. She felt dizzy as the implications of his words sank in. He had heard her playing. He had seen her in the practice room. Her carefully constructed facade was crumbling. "I heard someone performing Chopin's revolutionary etude with extraordinary skill and artistry, Doctor," Rodriguez continued. "Someone who clearly had years of serious training and a deep understanding of the music." Lily couldn't speak. She felt trapped, exposed, vulnerable in a way she hadn't experienced since losing her grandmother. "Lily, Doctor," Rodriguez said softly, "would you like to tell me about your real musical background?" For several minutes, the only sound in the room was the ticking of the clock on the wall. Lily struggled with whether to continue the deception or finally tell the truth. Part of her wanted to keep hiding, to maintain the safety of invisibility, but another part of her was exhausted from the constant pretense. Finally, she looked up at Dr. Rodriguez. His expression wasn't judgmental or angry. Instead, she saw genuine curiosity and what looked like concern. "My grandmother taught me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me about her," Dr. Rodriguez encouraged. And slowly, haltingly, the story began to emerge. Lily told him about Elena, about the tiny apartment with the old upright piano, about 15 years of intensive musical education that had taken place in secret, away from the formal world of lessons and competitions. As she spoke, Dr. Rodriguez began to understand the complexity of her situation. Elena had been a classically trained pianist before being forced to flee her homeland. She had passed on not just technical skills but deep musical knowledge to her granddaughter. "She taught me everything," Lily said, her voice growing stronger as she continued. "Music theory, performance techniques, historical context. We would practice for hours every evening after she came home from work." "What happened to her?" "Doctor," Rodriguez asked gently, Lily's eyes filled with tears. "She died 6 months ago. After that, everything fell apart. We lost the apartment, we lost the piano. My family moved here, and there was no money for music lessons or anything like that." The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place for Dr. Rodriguez: Lily's financial constraints, her reluctance to discuss her background, her decision to attend community college despite clearly having the talent for more prestigious institutions. "Why didn't you tell me about your training when I asked about your background?" he asked. Lily wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Because it would have led to questions I wasn't ready to answer. Questions about my grandmother, about why I'm here instead of at a conservatory, about my family situation." "And you've been practicing late at night in the practice rooms?" She nodded. "I use my student ID to get in after hours. I couldn't afford to sign up for official practice time, and I needed somewhere to play. It's the only connection I have left to my grandmother." Dr. Rodriguez felt a wave of emotion as he understood the full scope of what Lily had been carrying alone. She had been grieving the loss of her grandmother while trying to preserve the musical legacy Elena had given her, all while pretending to be someone she wasn't. "Lily," he said firmly, "you don't have to hide anymore. What I heard last night was extraordinary. You have the kind of talent and training that most of my students would envy." She looked at him skeptically. "But I can't afford private lessons, or summer programs, or any of the things that my classmates take for granted." "Formal training isn't the only path to musical excellence," Dr. Rodriguez replied. "Your grandmother gave you something that can't be bought, a deep, personal connection to music that comes from the heart. That's more valuable than any expensive program." For the first time in months, Lily felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe she didn't have to keep pretending to be less than she was. Maybe there was a place for her in this world of music, even without the advantages her classmates possessed. "What happens now?" she asked. Dr. Rodriguez smiled. "Now we figure out how to help you achieve your full potential. There are scholarships available, programs for talented students who need financial assistance. But first, I think it's time for your classmates to see who you really are." "I'm scared," Lily admitted. "That's understandable," Dr. Rodriguez said. "But fear shouldn't keep you from sharing your gift with the world. Your grandmother didn't teach you to play in hiding. She taught you to carry on a tradition, to keep the music alive." As they talked, Lily felt the weight of months of pretense beginning to lift from her shoulders. Dr. Rodriguez wasn't looking at her with pity or condescension anymore. He was seeing her as a serious musician, someone worthy of respect and support. "The recital is in 2 weeks," he said. "Are you ready to show everyone what you can really do?" Lily thought of Elena, of all the evenings they had spent together at the old upright piano, of the promise she had made to never let the music die inside her. "Yes," she said finally, "I think I am." The night of the recital arrived with an unexpected snowfall that blanketed the campus in pristine white. The main auditorium buzzed with activity as families and friends filled the seats, their excited chatter echoing off the high stage. Lights cast a warm glow over the black concert grand piano that sat center stage. Waiting, Lily stood in the backstage area, watching through a crack in the heavy curtains as the audience continued to arrive. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. She wore a simple black dress that Dr. Rodriguez had helped her find at a local thrift shop, and her long dark hair was pulled back in an elegant bun. "You'll be performing last tonight," Dr. Rodriguez had told her earlier that week. "I want your performance to be the one that stays with the audience when they leave." Now, as she watched her classmates prepare for their performances, Lily wondered if she had made a mistake in agreeing to reveal her true abilities. It would have been so much easier to stumble through a simplified version of the revolutionary etude, meeting Dr. Rodriguez's low expectations and remaining safely invisible. The recital began promptly at 7 o'clock. Dr. Rodriguez welcomed the audience and introduced the program, explaining that each student had prepared a challenging piece that demonstrated their growth throughout the semester. Ashley was first, performing Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor with technical competence but little emotional depth. She played the notes accurately but seemed more focused on getting through the piece without mistakes than on communicating its musical meaning. The audience applauded politely when she finished. Brandon followed with a batch invention, his performance clean and precise but lacking the conversational quality that made Batch's counterpoint come alive. Courtney played a Mozart sonata movement with pleasant tone but predictable phrasing. One by one, Lily's classmates took the stage and delivered competent but unremarkable performances. They played their pieces correctly, demonstrating the technical skills they had developed over the semester, but nothing more. The audience was attentive but not particularly engaged. As each performance concluded, Lily felt her anxiety growing. These students had years of formal training, expensive private lessons, and every advantage she lacked. Yet their performances, while skillful, seemed to lack the deeper connection to music that Elena had taught her was essential. "Musicians must be more than technicians," Elena had often said. "You must be storytellers, sharing your soul with the audience through every note." Finally, Dr. Rodriguez returned to the stage. Our final performer tonight is Lily Chun, performing Chopin's Revolutionary Etude in C minor, Opus 10, number 12. Lily walked onto the stage, her legs feeling unsteady beneath her. The auditorium seemed enormous from this perspective, filled with faces that blurred together under the bright stage lights. She could see her classmates sitting in the front rows, their expressions ranging from polite interest to barely concealed skepticism. She sat at the piano bench and adjusted her position, just as Elena had taught her so many years ago. For a moment, she placed her hands in her lap and closed her eyes, trying to connect with the memory of her grandmother's voice. Every time you play this piece, you are continuing his revolution. Lily opened her eyes and placed her hands on the keys. The first dramatic octaves rang out through the auditorium, and immediately the atmosphere in the room changed. This wasn't the tentative, careful approach of a student worried about making mistakes. This was the confident, passionate attack of someone who understood exactly what they were trying to say, as the piece unfolded. Lily felt herself transported back to Elena's tiny apartment, to those countless evenings when they had worked together to unlock the secrets of Chopin's music. She played not just the notes but the story behind them, the composer's anguish at hearing of Warsaw's fall, his longing for his homeland, his determination to fight oppression through beauty, the technical passages that Dr. Rodriguez had told her not to worry about flowed effortlessly under her fingers. The rapid runs and complex rhythms that he had assumed would challenge her were executed with stunning precision. But more than technical accuracy, her performance had something that none of the previous students had achieved. It had soul. In the audience, people began to sit forward in their seats. The polite attention that had characterized the earlier performances transformed into genuine engagement. Even her classmates, who had barely acknowledged her presence all semester, stared in amazement as the quiet girl from the back row commanded the stage with authority and artistry. Dr. Rodriguez stood at the side of the stage, his eyes filled with tears as he watched Lily pour 15 years of musical training and months of hidden grief into her performance. This was what music was supposed to be, not just an academic exercise but a profound form of human communication. As the piece built toward its climactic passages, Lily's entire body became involved in the music. She swayed with the emotional peaks and valleys of Chopin's composition, her face reflecting the intensity of the musical narrative she was telling. This wasn't a student recital performance anymore. This was a concert-level artistic statement. The revolutionary energy that Chopin had embedded in the music seemed to fill the auditorium. Lily played with the passion of someone who understood that music could be an act of resistance, a way of preserving beauty in the face of loss and hardship. The final section of the etude thundered through the concert hall, Lily's hands moving across the keys with power and precision that left the audience breathless. As the last dramatic octaves rang out and faded into silence, the auditorium remained completely still for several seconds. Then the applause began, not the polite, measured clapping that had followed the other performances, but genuine, enthusiastic appreciation for what they had just witnessed. People rose to their feet, including several of her classmates who had spent the semester looking down on her. Lily stood and bowed, feeling a mixture of relief, exhaustion, and joy flooding through her. As she looked out at the standing ovation, she caught sight of Dr. Rodriguez wiping tears from his eyes. When she finally left the stage, Dr. Rodriguez was waiting for her in the wings. "Lily," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "that was extraordinary. In 20 years of teaching, I have rarely heard a performance with that level of musical maturity and artistic vision." Other students approached her as she made her way backstage, their attitudes completely transformed. Ashley, who had whispered dismissively about her all semester, seemed stunned. "Where did you learn to play like that?" she asked, her voice filled with genuine awe. For the first time in months, Lily felt comfortable enough to share a piece of her story. "My grandmother taught me," she said simply. As the evening wound down and families began to leave the auditorium, Dr. Rodriguez approached Lily with a serious expression. "We need to talk about your future," he said. "What you demonstrated tonight, That level of talent shouldn't be hidden away at a community college. There are scholarship opportunities, programs for students with exceptional ability. He pulled out his phone and showed her a website. The State Conservatory has a full scholarship program for students who demonstrate both artistic excellence and financial need. The application deadline isn't until spring, and after tonight's performance, I would be honored to write your recommendation letter. Lily stared at the scholarship information, hardly daring to believe what she was seeing. A full scholarship to a real conservatory where she could study with master teachers and immerse herself in serious musical training. "But I'm just a community college student," she said uncertainly. Dr. Rodriguez smiled. "No, Lily, you're an artist. You always have been. Tonight, you finally let the rest of us see it." As they walked out of the auditorium together, snow still falling softly outside, Lily felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope for the future. She thought of Elena, of the promise she had made to never let the music die inside her. Tonight, she had done more than keep that promise. She had honored Elena's memory by sharing the gift her grandmother had given her with the world. And in doing so, she had discovered that her grandmother's lessons about music being more than just notes on a page were true. Music was connection. Music was resistance. Music was the bridge between who she had been and who she was becoming, the revolution. Elena had taught her about wasn't just in Chopin's composition, it was in her own life, in her decision to stop hiding and start becoming the musician she was always meant to be.